Why did I want to become a human rights activist? Because I saw all the atrocities that were happening around the world, but mostly what was happening within my own community here in Glasgow, and my friends being taken like that and treated like that. But that opened my eyes to what was happening globally, and I wanted to make even more of a difference. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, what can I do? How can I use my voice to create positive change? And that's what led me to do what I do today. I work for a charity organization as well. I've went to uni, I've studied community development at Glasgow Uni, and I've also finished a master's in human rights and international politics. And that opened even more doors for me. I went to Geneva, I went to the United Nations. I've gone to refugee camps to visit what's been happening with Alison Phipps and Joe Brady. I'm sure he's here somewhere. And that's, again, it's opened my eyes even more. So it's always about taking every opportunity that comes your way, because that's what you care about and that's the difference you want to make.
Canada is a colonized country. That means that centuries ago, Indigenous peoples roamed the lands freely, and then different groups of colonizers, Britain and France, came over and newly discovered the land and essentially overtook the people on the land. Within our legislation, our first Prime Minister, it's quoted that he wanted to get rid of the Indigenous people. There were systems put in place to try and erase Indigenous people from our country. That has affected all of our systems today, and still does. For women, a lot of Indigenous communities are matrilineal, which means that women lead and elders and female leaders are really respected. But when colonization came, that shifted to more of a patrilineal or patriarchy. And so the power dynamic shifted, and that has affected women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA groups very differently.
We know that people are being forced to leave their homes by floods or natural disasters. What would it be like if that were to happen here? And we know that it might. And I think I just want you to think about that. Think about your own home. What would it be like? I don't know where your own home is. It may be a home that might go on fire, or it might be a home that could be flooded. All of us can imagine our homes perhaps being bombed. But just to think about that for a minute, what would you do, actually? You know, what would you grab? Who would you grab? Who might be missing because they're away somewhere else? And then when you had got out of your home, where would you go next? Because I guess, you know, all around would be chaos as well. How would you get around? There probably wouldn't be any buses running. Maybe the roads would be blown up. How would you get along? And then where would you end up, actually? Would there be somewhere nice and comfortable to go and sit it out? Maybe not. And I think it's worth us thinking about that, because actually, as was pointed out just now, it's not as far away from possibility as it's easy for us to think.
Do something in life for your job that you're really passionate about. And once you find that thing you're really passionate about, if you can do that as your career, you never feel like you're working, and you build a sense of resilience because you're so passionate about the issue. So on that question of resilience, I think that's why I'm resilient. I mean, I now work on an issue that is really, to me, so painful, which is that 4 environmental and land defenders, people who defend the environment, who speak up against corporations or against the government, are killed per week around the world. 4 environmental and land defenders are killed per week. Those are people who say, I don't want that coal-fired power plant here, or you cannot do that agricultural development in this piece of forest, or this is my indigenous territory, or this, I've lived on this area for the last, and I fish in it and you can't use it, or stop polluting here. And I'm passionate and I'm resilient because I work on these issues, because I really care. I don't think people who use their voice to protect the planet should be attacked or killed for it.
I think as young girls, we have the power we have voices, and I'm happy to see, like, today it was like feminism, like, is the solution. And I think we have the power to do the change as long as we work together.
So I think the question is, what is feminism? And for me, it's about people, you know, really fighting back against the kind of inequalities that women have experienced over the years around, you know, having less money, having less assets, having less choice and decision-making power, and also around the biology of women. So the fact that we menstruate and we can get pregnant and we can have children, really determines a lot of what we do in life. And so we see climate change degrading climate. So women are often farmers, and so they're the ones that lose out. We see waters degrading, fish declining. Women in many parts of the world work in fish processing plants, and they're losing their jobs over that. We see climate emergencies that women are at the forefront of. They're often the ones who lose their home. They're the ones who have to stay back with the children. There's an increase in gender-based violence. And I think men have got to be part of the answer, and men have got to be agents of change and not part of the problem. So I don't think we can say that we only, to be feminist is only working with women. It's got to be engaging men in these conversations.
It needs the older generations to make changes, but, unless you're on board, those changes are not going to be far-reaching enough. And you're the next generation who probably are going to live with the effects of climate change. We always sort out things that our elders did. I'm from Germany, and we, lived forever with the guilt of the Second World War, and we kept saying, nothing to do with us. It's our grandparents who started it, but without knowing what happened and making sure that it doesn't happen again. And I think I see you guys in the same situation. You know what happened. You're in the full knowledge. There's no excuse not to do the right things, because we now have the science, we've got the evidence, we know what needs doing.
I agree with that, but it's also a lot of us have been campaigning for a long time. It's not as though we've been sitting here buying Range Rovers every day. I've been an activist since I was 12. I became vegetarian when no one even knew that was a thing. I drove my mother out of her mind with my vegetarian diet from the age of 12. Lots of us have been working for a long time. I did my undergraduate degree 1994. I did an ecology degree. We knew at the time what needed to be done, but a lot of us have been going through with very little power to change things, and it's really seeing now the things that I wanted when I was your age actually really happening, because now it's becoming a global movement.
One of the first things I would like everybody to be doing, and that's everybody from individuals like yourselves, to your families, to your schools, to the councils, to anybody that's buying food, is to look at where this food comes from and see if it could be more local. Are we buying things that are grown on the other side of the planet, shipped to the other side of the planet to be packaged, brought to the other side of the planet to be processed again, and then brought over to here? What we can do kind of more on a household level, like what you folks can do yourselves, looking at things like how we plan what we're going to eat over a week. If you're only buying the things that you're going to eat and eating the things that you're buying, you're not going to be wasting as much.
People talk about plastic a lot, but food waste is actually a much bigger problem than plastic, because there's actually just much more of it. A third of all the food produced in the world ends up in the bin, and most of that waste actually happens in households, and the reason for that is that a lot of people just buy too much, and also they put too much on their plates as well. It's not just the food that you haven't, that's in the fridge and you haven't opened, it's also the food that you put on your plate and decided, oh, that's too much, and you just put it in your bin.
How does the right to food help? Which is what we advocate for in Scotland. So the right to food is, as I mentioned before, it's a human right. So it's a right that you have and that communities have and can hold their governments, but also businesses accountable for to some extent, in an ideal world. And it's the idea that you have a right to have good food. And that means that you have the right to access food, either to grow it or to have the money or the means to buy it or get it in some other way. And so good food means food that is healthy for you individually, not by somebody else's standards, but actually good for you, and food that's appropriate, that you like, that you find tasty, that fits with your culture and your preferences. But it also means food that is sustainable. So that food that is produced and consumed in a way that preserves food for future generations.
If we all make a collective effort to do small things, we can make a big difference. One big thing you can do around food is to just use more tap water. So rather than buying bottled drinks and soft drinks, just rely on the good old Scottish tap water. Take a refillable bottle and use that, and that helps to save resources. We can also think about the amount of food that we waste. Okay, so food waste is a huge issue. Really make a conscious effort to try and waste less, or use more of the leftovers that are left after meals. Use that crust of bread that usually stays in the packet and gets thrown away.
I was an orphan and I came from public housing. I was the poorest person in my high school. That would not have been able to be possible for me to go to college. Also, the jobs that I've had. I told you I worked for Morgan Stanley. I always say my great-grandmother would have been able to clean the waste baskets. My grandmother would have been a secretary. My mother would have been, if I had lived with my mother, she would have been maybe a vice president. I could now run that company. So you have to look at the passage of time. You all have the world open to you. You could go to college pretty much anywhere you want at this point without it being, racial or socioeconomic or gender issues. You can get almost any job.